Hello.
Hello.
So we have a kind of a unique stream tonight. Well, really, all our streams are unique. The title tonight is Feminism, Consent of the Governed. So I want to draw a parallel between consent of the governed to the phenomena of feminism. And it's kind of an American mindset that everybody just, we believe it so deeply in this concept of consent of the governed, so we don't even realize what we're saying. Consent of the governed is really, you can't tell me what to do. I don't recognize your authority over me. I'm going to go do my own thing over there. I'm going to set up my own group, do my own thing. Your rules don't apply to me. So what do you think of the topic, Plutarch?
Well, I think you're going to set some people off, create some controversy. You're going to, yeah, it's going to be a little different. Because when you proposed this, even I was turning it around in my head, going, "Oh, this is an uncomfortable one." Nick will join us at some point. He is currently engaged with his family, so he gets the night off tonight. Unless he can join us. So, yeah.
Well, he'll miss out.
Yeah, this topic has me nervous though, because there's a lot of ways we can really piss people off talking about it.
I suppose, but I'm not here to piss people off. I'm here to just talk about a concept. And I you know what? I might be wrong. And there are people out there that know a lot more about the founding of this country. And if they want to take this concept and do some research and refute it, great. It's a good discussion, and I like good discussions. So I'm just introducing a topic, and take what you want from it. I'm not going to do any conclusions here about what is true and what is not true, or what you should believe, or that my beliefs are correct. It's just things to think about. So I hope no one takes offense, because this is different, an alternative way of thinking about things using some history. And if you don't know your history, you don't really know where you're at. So, okay, we're going to go into history and some of the beliefs, historical beliefs, and see how that may have guided or formed how things are done today.
And I just want to speak up here, guys. I have studied history probably at a more autistic level than most people in the U.S., and I was homeschooled, so I was allowed to. And we were talking about the Tea Act that supposedly set off the Revolutionary War, and I went and looked it up, and I was reading it going, even I never knew all this stuff. As spurgy as I could be about history growing up, even I never knew some of the stuff that they were talking about. And this is Wikipedia. We're not talking about, some, biased article. I mean, people claim Wikipedia has bias in it, but it's not like, oh, we're super conspiracy buyers. No, this is stuff right off Wikipedia.
And I'll just add to that. Yeah, everybody thinks, oh, the Americans were just pissed off because the tea tax was making tea too expensive, and so the Boston Tea Party happened, and they went down out of protest and dumped the bales off into the Boston Harbor. Well, no, it's not quite that simple. They were trying to repeal the tax. The people who went down there to do it may have been smuggling tea. They might have been just as pissed off that the tax was going away. And so their lucrative smuggling wouldn't be as lucrative. Um, as with anything, there's a lot of stuff going on. Nothing is quite that simple.
All right.
So let's see what Nick has to say.
Well, I came in at the T, so my understanding is as a matter of principle. Even though it was like a small percent of tax, it was like, what was it? Anybody remember what the tax was? It was
3
like
shillings.
306. Yeah, okay. Tiny thing, but it's the principle of it.
Well, so there is a chunk of the history here. Lord North he actually bears a lot of blame for the Revolutionary War. His name comes up all the time, and there was a specific duty that they were trying to get rid of, and he didn't want to because that was how they were funding the colonial official salaries. So, his name comes up in a lot of these sort of actions that piss off the colonial Americans.
Fun stuff. Yeah, a lot of my ancestors fought in the American Revolution.
The first Civil War.
And both. Yeah, both. Yeah.
Well, so I just want a point of clarity. If we're going to talk about the revolution, it was not called the revolution at the time. It was called it. The people who were fighting it called it a civil war. The revolutionary language would come much later.
And what do the English people call it? What do the English call the war? The Presbyterian Revolution.
I don't know. Okay, we're going to bring that aspect in later.
Okay.
I'm glad Nick is here. and Nick enjoys a good debate about things, and if things get controversial, yeah, he's having fun, and then we debate it, and we're still friends, even if we have different views. So, consent of the governed. And so where I want to start is this concept, consent of the governed, is very pervasive. So I want to read part of the Declaration of Independence, and I want everyone, when they talk about government, I want them to think, oh, that's the husband. And when they talk about the king, that's the husband. When they talk about men, that's the wife. So let's look at the language in that. Can you pull that up, Plutarch?
I can't see anything so you haven't shared your screen yet.
Oh, well, I didn't. I just sent you the Word document.
It did not get attached. I don't have a Word document.
Oh, gee.
So,
okay.
Boomer alert here.
Yeah. Okay, you guys talk for a bit while I find it.
The consent of the governed. There's different ways you can take that at the time. There's the Lockean view, and then there's the classical kind of federal covenantal view that goes back to the rights of Englishmen, like in the Magna Carta and stuff like that. So we'll be getting into that, I think, in the Declaration of Independence.
Okay.
Yeah, we would.
So I'll read this paragraph, and everybody should be familiar with this. But yeah, think of this in terms of men and women. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. That when any form of government becomes destructive in these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem likely, most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established could not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. So did you detect in here some words that feminists use to justify feminism, divorce, and
Yeah, I think there's some issues here, but it's pre-Jacobinism. That's of the French Revolution. So
Mm-hmm.
it could also that's really gonna be the impetus where they start taking this language in that Jacobin egalitarian viewpoint instead of an equality as Dabney would put it, like before the law. And he himself didn't quite, not
Well,
everybody had a complete agreement with everything in this declaration.
no, they did not. And so in terms of language, this one comes up quite a bit. Pursuit of happiness.
Yeah,
Now they don't say it that way in modern language. This is the word happiness would have been understood differently back then. Um and that we are going to have to sort of work around some of the word meaning differences because we're talking about something that's 250 years old. You know,
yeah.
the modern language has changed, but
Well, I'm not here to criticize the Declaration of Independence or what happened or say that it was wrong. That's not my point. I'm not going to argue that. I'm just saying that this established a way of thinking, and then it evolved. The essence of the thinking evolved over time to a you're not going to tell me what to do, and a rebellion against authority. And feminism is really a rebellion against authority. And they, talk about, well, why was feminism needed? Well, women were oppressed. And, there were husbands were tyrants. So they just
mhm.
had to have, feminism and the right to vote because they needed representation. That's the thought I want to explore here.
Well, you're going to see a lot of this language show up, and there's a point that I want to make. The Declaration of Independence, after it was written, was actually used in a number of other places around the world in as a template or a framework for other declarations of independence. I'm thinking about the Viet Cong French Revolution against the French. I'm thinking about there was another one I can't remember, but I want to say Libya, but I could be wrong. But this document has been used in ways that, ironically, by Marxists, uh, the Viet Cong versus the French, to sort of do the same thing, to say the same thing. I have a lot of thoughts on this, but anyone else, you can go ahead.
Well, the Jacobins, that's the kind of revolutionary party in the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror. They were those that wanted to, have equalism. So they would take these concepts like this declaration, be confused why not all of America would get behind them. That's in the 1790s.
Mm.
Yeah, what were the three?
Who took over after?
Yeah, what were the three cries?
Oh, I was thinking about that before I showed. It was fraternity, egalite, and some other thing. But yeah,
Liberté.
Liberté.
fraternity, liberté, egalite. Yeah.
Yes. The French.
And there were aspects of this in the American Revolution as well, right?
It was there.
Supposedly that there were Masonic influences to the French Revolution, and there certainly were Masonic influences to the American Revolution. Many of our founding fathers were Masons, and I've read that the Masons at that time had were not quite the same Masons as we have today. I mean, it kind of evolved. And then, you can get into, if you study the Masons and then the Illuminati come in, and there's a whole, oh man, you can go deep into that shit.
And it's a lot of shit.
So like the French, they're primarily influenced by people like Voltaire and Rousseau. The English, they had this Lockean concept that started to compete with traditional, like biblical informed covenantalism, contract theory. So that like the Lockean, they would have a social. You ever heard of the idea of the social contract? That's Locke, and that's where you get the consent of the governed and all that stuff.
But Locke wasn't really Christian, was he?
I don't believe so. No, I don't. His philosophy doesn't make that. It's not consistent. I don't think it. I don't know what he personally professed, but his philosophy is not consistent with Christianity. No.
Well, and the founding fathers who were writing this stuff were cribbing from a lot of different places. Because I know Voltaire and Locke both show up in the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers as cited sources. So, and
have you ever heard of Lex Rex?
Lex Rex? No, I haven't.
So that's Samuel Rutherford's book saying instead of the king is, law, he says the law is king. He's one of the people of the Westminster Assembly, pretty foundational for the founding of America and the Presbyterians in fighting the revolution. They got some of their concepts from him. And another document is Vindiciae contra Tyrannos, vindication against tyrants. The idea of lesser magistrates and rebelling and so on and so forth.
Okay, well, let's keep this on feminism because, we've already pointed out there's a whole bunch of history here, a history of thought. These changes are still with us, and they came forward. So, there's this, when the form of the, well, okay, let me reread this. put in some different words. That whenever any form of marriage becomes destructive, it is the right of the woman to alter or abolish it and to institute freedom and laying principles on her desire for safety and happiness. Oh, wait a minute. Have
Mhm.
we ever
Yep.
heard that I'm not happy
Yep.
as a justification? Well, gee, it's interesting that that same concept is here.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Oh, this is the same problem that we're seeing now with how the modern progressives read the Second Amendment. And I'm not going to make this into a Second Amendment thing, but catch me if I'm wrong here. But when the way this is written, they're describing something, and then at the end they say, "As to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness." Now, safety did not mean um, secure from verbal harm back then. Remember, we're dealing with an era where you go walk the wrong direction in a forest and you never come back out. You know that, right? You know,
Right.
the whole man versus bear and
Rights to,
happy. Go ahead.
yeah. Rights to own property in person. Yeah.
Yeah,
Protection of property in person.
right. So, but they try to, but they're trying to say here that this this back half, this after the comma portion,
Mhm.
you know, justifies the front half. Which, and the reason I brought up the Second Amendment is
What?
because,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. So because they want to do this, they should be able to do this. Does that make sense?
mm,
Because that
Well, kind of,
because
but I want to
so
bring up
go
something
ahead.
else. When the understanding of language and words change, then they use the words to mean something that it didn't mean at the time
Correct.
as a
oh,
justification. Is that what?
like abuse, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I might have jumped ahead there.
No, you're good.
Oh,
But
we talked
okay,
about that.
the next part, prudence is required. You have to be prudent.
What is prudence these
And
days?
I don't know. People don't know what it means, but you can't do it on a whim for trivial causes. And
Oh,
women also, oh man, women were disposed to suffer. While suffering was tolerable. But, when given the opportunity to throw off their shackles.
oh, like
And
Wollstonecraft used Rousseau's concept. Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
yeah.
And then the
So, like,
next
that's
thing.
yeah. She described that as the other half of humanity in chains, and so she wanted to throw off the shackles.
Yeah.
Well, this is again, they sit here and they mix and match around the commas, because with the Second Amendment they did the back half of the thing. They try and say that the first clause does not justify the second clause, or it actually limits it. But in here they say prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes.
Right?
And so in order to make their cause not light and transient, they have to build up this view that the tyranny and usurpations of the men over them is so complete and is so devastating to them that it is not a light and transient cause, and that the throwing off the shackles of patriarchy are the only solution left to them.
Mm. But who defines what are
They do. Well, that's
Of course.
obvious from reading this. Men, in
Yeah.
this case, women are the governed, and it takes their consent to be governed. When they're suffering, they have the right to throw off their chains. They get to
Yeah.
decide.
See, I think that's what's confusing is that the people had rights under English law that they're standing up for when this was written. And the women back then, even today, well, not so much today, but traditionally you took, solemn oaths and vows that were supposedly binding. So you knew what you were getting into contractually. And you had recourse, before using civil magistrates and the church elders. And it did happen in history. But
Yeah, well, the
we,
colonists also had oaths to the king, and the courts were
right.
here. Presumably, they had the ability to go to court. Not well, everything was against
And it
the
didn't
king,
work.
but for redress.
It didn't work.
No,
Plus, they had a
probably
foreign
not.
government imposing. They had a foreign government imposing on them, contrary to the rights of Englishmen. So,
Yeah. Well, now
Par-
let's go to the
English
next
Parliament. Yeah. Anyway,
paragraph. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them to utter despotism. Wow. When a woman has been abused for so long and kept under a man's thumb because he's a tyrant and he's reducing her to despotism, slavery, and servitude, and she has nothing to say about it. It is her right, it is her duty to throw off her husband and go live a different way because of security. She's afraid of this man. Now she can go do something else, and then she can get a restraining order against him because she doesn't feel safe around him.
Mm. Mm. I find this one somewhat ironic because these women out here are under absolute despotism. I have never met in my life, I know they exist, but I haven't met a guy that I would consider an absolute tyrant. Now, I'm young, product of the modern era, right? We're talking about words that are used in a 250-year-old context, roughly. Okay. But at what point does I don't I don't like your tone become despotism? And this is where I think that this is where I think that history diverges from what's being done today. Let's allow for a moment, and I actually do not agree with this, but let's stipulate for a moment, we're going to steelman this a little bit, that the despotism of men in the 1850s and beyond was so bad that the women actually did meet the bar established in the Declaration, for overthrowing, that this form of marriage had become so destructive that it was necessary to throw them off. Let's grant that for a moment. Okay, what were these? This would imply that even in that era, that these men were, whipping their women, that they were mistreating them, that they were basically that they were slaves in the chattel sort of mentality to
Well,
their men,
yeah.
and that they could not do anything else. Okay, but if we get to the we're not talking here about things that are, I don't like the way you said this, or, well, I don't want to do that because I don't want to. So even granting that as a standard, we're not there right now.
Well, let me point out why we are there. You're using facts and logic to say we're not there.
Yes, sir.
Women act on feelings, and they feel that it is so bad. And facts and logic telling them, well, it's really not that bad. You shouldn't feel that way. You're invalidating her feelings, and her feelings are more important than anything else. And women actually believe that 200 years ago women were treated the way you described. They actually believe that, and that's the reason for feminism, and that's the reason they are fighting against the patriarchy, because in the past all these women were treated like slaves and just they had a miserable existence.
Oh,
Well,
1619 project, huh?
uh,
For women.
well, it's funny you bring that up, because I was listening to Andrew and on whatever last night, and of course there was this uber feminist girl, and she was, just as a random side note, she looked like she was methed out of her head. She's wearing this red dress and would not stop bouncing in her chair. Very distracting. But she kept trying to say women were slaves. She actually used the women were slaves argument back before voting. And
Okay.
yeah, and then she tried to say, well, all people should have the right to vote if they pay taxes. Of course, Andrew promptly demolished her on that by pointing out that 60% of people do not pay taxes in the United States. Sorry, guys, that's just a bit of a hard lesson for you leftists out there.
And
But
they get more back in benefits
correct.
than they pay in taxes. If they pay taxes, they're getting huge benefits: Social Security, welfare,
Yep.
supplemental or SNAP benefits, food stamps, basically. And they're net drains on the system. Andrew also said that.
Right.
Oh, and by the way, this doesn't include the child support they're receiving too.
No, that you're correct. That would not be counted because that is labeled as a direct transfer between private parties. I'm sure Nick could tell us all about this.
Oh yeah.
But that's exactly, she was trying to say, oh, well, but that's why everyone should be able to vote. I want to point out here that, and she tried to say, oh, well, men could vote and women could not. Factually incorrect. In order to vote under the original Constitution, not the Articles, the Constitution, you had to own land.
That's correct. And who changed that? Under which presidency was that changed?
To when all men could vote, it was
I think Jackson. Wasn't it Andrew Jackson?
yeah, it was Jackson.
Yeah.
All white men.
Yeah, yes, all white men. That was Jackson. And then it was all women, and that because the suffragettes, wasn't because that was the late 1920s, I want to say, that they finally got it.
I pulled up the amendments
19th
for
Amendment
this.
was like 1920, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 1920. Oh, 1919. Okay, that would have been Woodrow Wilson.
So the 15th Amendment allowed blacks to vote, basically. Black men to vote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And then
Jackson would have been
19th
before
Amendment allowed all women to vote. So in what year were all men in all men. I mean, all men in the United States finally given the right to vote.
All
Might not
men.
know this.
Like, you mean
Every
mankind?
single citizen.
Oh,
Okay.
every single citizen.
Every single citizen male.
Okay.
Might be kind of a trick question because there was a bunch of people here who weren't considered citizens.
Yes, I know the slaves were not considered citizens.
Well, there's a
Proper.
compromise there. Yeah.
They were counted towards. That was the 3/5 compromise.
Yeah,
They
you're
were.
going down the wrong path.
Yeah, no.
The Native Americans, the Indians, did not
That's
get the
true.
right to vote until about it was in the 20s, 1920 or so.
Oh, yeah. After,
So
nationalism had won the
yeah,
day.
they must not have
Yeah.
been considered citizens of the United States. They were tribe
They're sovereign
members.
nations.
They had their own nations within,
Absolutely.
and they're still called
The Indian nations.
Indian nations. And so, no, all women got the right to vote before all men got the right to vote.
Oh,
But nobody
that'll
knows
tie
this
the
stuff.
well, but see, that'll tie the BIPOC people in knots because they're all about the indigenous peoples. That's the IP in BIPOC. And so what you're saying is that the women got the right to vote before the indigenous peoples. Oh my. There's a little
Yes.
bit of unfriendly history for you feminists out there.
Well,
See, this is
since
all
women
this is
got the
all as
right
a
to vote
result
in
of
1919, it was probably the
all
women who corrected that error.
tends to
The
be a
Snyder,
result
the
of state 14th Amendment led to kind of all this stuff, which paved a way to federalize so many laws instead of the states being able to deny people in their jurisdiction their votes. So 14th led the way to the 15th, and so on and so forth. And now you have the civil rights crap shoved down your throat, where they can define whatever they want. And you have to accept it. Otherwise, you could be in breach of law and being
Well, a
persecuted.
lot of that's based on the
Anyway.
14th
Right.
Amendment, right?
yeah.
Right. So when you heard me cringe, I was thinking of the 14th, and that led to the 15th and everything else. So.
Steve, it was the Snyder Act of 1924. So there were 5 years. There were 5 years where not all men could vote, but all women could vote. There's one for you. There's one for you guys.
Yeah, we're kind of getting into some trivia here. We're giving people a history lesson. So let's keep on with the Declaration of Independence, just to point out parallels. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies or these women, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former marriage. Well, you can see there's a parallel here. And the history of the present King of Great Britain, the history of the present husband, is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations. And he had absolute tyranny over her. So, okay, now let's just scroll back up to the top. All men are created equal and are endowed with certain unalienable rights. Okay, and their rights are instituted by God. I mean, that's implied here. And the consent of the governed. So if they withdraw their consent, well, it seems to be they've made their case that they can do what they want and go their own way. But this is called we call it the Revolutionary War. And it was rebellion against the king. When a woman divorces a man, it's rebellion against the king. Her king is her husband. Her lord Doesn't the Bible say a woman should call her husband Lord?
1 Peter chapter 3.
Well, and also Sarah called Abraham Lord.
Yeah, 1 Peter chapter.
So I mean, there is parallels here.
The suffragettes certainly cribbed the concepts. And here's another point that I want to make, because Elena and I have been diving through early American history recently. The time between the establishment of the Constitution in, I want to say it's the 1786, I believe, is when the Constitution was ratified. And the start of really the suffragette move, it's not really the suffrage movement, but sort of modern feminism with the Seneca Falls Convention on Women's Rights in 1854. You're
Well, I read
only
1848.
1848. Am I wrong? Okay. So
Maybe.
Right.
It's in there.
yeah. I can look it up. Seneca Falls Convention.
Same. It doesn't detract from the point, though.
Yeah, you're right. 1848. So okay, so you're talking about what? 60 years? 60 years. There are at this point still a few people alive who remember the ratification of the Constitution. Not many, but there were plenty of and they would have been kids at the time, but they would have had conversations with their parents about what this meant. What, this is what we call living memory. It would have been, so they knew what it meant. They knew what the founders were trying to say. And they chose to use it and change the words anyway. Change the meaning of the words. Sorry.
And the Declaration, only served its purpose to declare independence. It's not technically wasn't technically a legal document for the country.
The Declaration,
No.
Yeah, that's correct.
It has no force of law.
Right.
So the Constitution was ratified in 1788, which means that it was exactly 60 years later at the Seneca Falls Convention. Almost to the day.
But it was a justification for doing this.
Yeah.
If you don't like what's happening, you can rebel against that and go your own way.
Yeah.
And that's basically what women have done. I want to point out something else. It's kind of a side issue. That first clause is they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if the creator gives the rights, why does the government have to give the rights to Black people to vote and to women to vote? If rights do the rights come from God or do they come from the government?
Okay.
Nice. There you go. That's why. The South understood that pretty well. Let's put it that way.
Oh no. We're not opening that can of worms. We're not going there. We don't have enough hours in the day to go there. And I've been reading more on that because of your offline rant. So it's not that easy. Anyway, so here's the way I read this. I have certain rights. I don't have all rights. Voting is not a right.
No, it's not. Look at the history of the nations.
Exactly. Exactly. Voting is not a right, it's a privilege. And it is a privilege that must be assigned with all due concern and care. It's why I study history. It's why I, read. It's why I actually, I read the position statements of people. I research how they voted, because when I vote, my vote is directed towards, something that I am trying to, you know, my beliefs about how this stuff should work. Yes, I understand that can be flawed, as we've kind of proven today. But at least I can say that I voted with a clear mind and a clear conscience, and a, if not reasonable, then passable understanding of the issues. You have very few unalienable rights. You have the right to life. That is an unalienable right given to you by your creator, God, if you worship and Nick, you can back me up or tell me I'm wrong, but if God creates us, I do believe that he gives us the right to life.
He does. You have that's under the you shall not kill. You have a regard not only for the life of others, but your own. So,
Exactly. Which means then, therefore, that I have the right to defend my life and the life of others.
right.
So when we talk about the Second Amendment, what we're really in this regard, because that's commonly brought up in this, is the reason that that amendment exists is not because the founders were saying, "Oh, this is about having firearms." No, this is about making sure that the individual person has the implements to guard their unalienable creator endowed right to their own life. And those implements must be suitable to that task. So, when they say, "Oh, well, because there were only muskets when this was written, that's all you can have." Well, that's not entirely true to start with, but because rifles were a thing, they were just really expensive. Anyway, the point
Yeah,
being
Lex Rex
here,
was actually conducive to the argument of the right to bear arms in self-defense. So that's Samuel Rutherford there as well.
right? So this is not so the right to free speech is. Now, this one, I'm not necessarily sure that there's a biblical backing for. Um, and Nick, again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the Declaration they list three rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I cannot have liberty without the ability to speak. And my personal view is I would much rather bad speech be made public. I want to see who is out there speaking stupid stuff. And that way we can point at the stupid stuff, say, here's why it's stupid. And then once we've correctly disassembled it, we can laugh at them for being stupid and send them, scampering away. So I don't.
This is where Presbyterians are divided.
Okay.
Some want to do the liberty, the idea to do they view the law as a law of liberty, so you're allowed to do, what God prescribes. But then liberty took on this other meaning, later on. Um, but also the confessional documents talk about restraining speech, and the civil magistrate would have some degree of power to restrain speech that they thought was dishonoring to God and would corrupt the people he was entrusted to rule over.
Hey, Steve, you were talking about this before we started, weren't you?
Religion?
Well, no, the concept of the church being able to deal with heresy. And
Yeah, I mean, people have always, the church has always fought against what they deem heretics. So, I mean, freedom of religion has not ever really been a church concept. It's no, we're setting the morals here. You need to abide by
That was
us.
an antinomian concept, actually. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Steve. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
I had a thought that
Before we
came
go
off
much
actually.
further, hey, I'm going to bring
Okay.
up this comment.
Hi, Siege. It
Hey,
does
since
always
the
go
You
back
know
to
what?
rebellion with Steve.
That's true. I mean, I keep talking about rebellion, and I guess that's my theme. Okay, well, where things go bad, it's rebellion. A lot of other Christians would say, well, it's sin. Sin is what
Same
causes
thing.
all the problems. Well, yeah, specifically, it's the sin of rebellion against authority, rebellion against tradition. And now, okay, we talked on religion here a little bit. We have this concept, and nowhere that I know of has Christians separated into so many denominations as the U.S.
Yeah.
They are at odds with what their denomination or their church says. Well, I'm just going to rebel and go do my own thing over here. So they have a new concept like, oh, infants shouldn't be baptized. Needs to be adults. So over that, I'm going to go form my own. Now, I'm not arguing right or wrong here. I'm just saying there's this consent. If I don't consent to the hierarchy within the establishment and that authority, I can leave and go do my own thing. And
That's real interesting, Steve. In the founding of
and one,
America, who came over? Who came over? It was all those people. Who
the
came over to
Puritans,
the colonies? Some of them, the Anabaptists, Antinomians, Quakers, and they kept spinning off and spinning off and spinning off. Even some of the Puritans, yeah.
and then look, these even further branches. The Mormons. What country did they come from? Christian
Missouri?
Science.
Missouri.
Jehovah's Witnesses. Weren't all these things just, it just keeps dividing. People have different ideas and they go do their own thing. I mean, what I'm trying, the concept here is this consent of the governed and your right to rebel and go do your own thing is just so deeply ingrained in the American psyche
Of course it is. And can I
that
tell
it
you, Steve?
shows up in many areas. Go ahead.
It's my family history too. I got a lot of the Quakers and Anabaptists in my family history. Sad to say. It's a sad report, but I have those in my family history.
We probably all do. There's a certain aspect
Those
of
are
we just
great.
have to admit that that's all of us, because who came over? Well, it wasn't the people who were enjoying the church of the state in Britain. They were fine with what they had. They didn't need to come over. They weren't being persecuted by the. And we were having a conversation months ago, but the United States has more outright cults in it than any other country on the planet. It does. Where
Yeah,
do
I
all these
believe it. It's
wacko
nuts.
cults come from? It's us.
Oh yeah. Oh man. It's in our blood.
It is.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Rebellion is in our blood, and feminism has a unique American flavor to it. And our modern divorces, no fault divorce. Hey, there seems to be a theme that's going throughout the history of the U.S. And these concepts are not inconsistent.
So Steve, I want to hijack this a little bit because the actual concept of modern day feminism did not originate in the United States. The what you know as modern feminism originates in Europe. The as Nick would say, that would be the Jacobins. They were not they did not start in the United States. They started in France. They started even in Germany with Marx and Engels. That's where these ideas came from. But there's an interesting parallel, or you know, like you can put Europe up against the United States. Europe has over the years dealt with feminism very differently than the United States has. The European feminism doesn't have that, or at least it did not until the United States exported its third wave feminism to Europe. It didn't have that same rebellious, that outright rebellious nature until after World War II, when the United States rebuilt Europe. And that's when we exported our culture to Europe. But if you look at their history, they were the people were, and I'm not talking about the French, the time of troubles and all of that goes on for 100 years or more, or whatever it ends up being. But I'm you know, like in their relationships and in their forms of government, the Europeans have always accepted a more authoritarian view of government, and even to this day still do. The German government is very oppressive of certain types of speech. You do not have the right to free speech in Germany. You have the right
So
to
what was,
politically acceptable speech.
what was the last country in Europe to give women the privilege to vote?
Oh, I'd have to look that up. I have no idea.
Okay, well, I'll give you a hint. When could women in Switzerland begin to vote? The answer will shock
Oh,
you.
It's in Europe. The last jurisdiction to grant women the right to vote was the Swiss canton of Appenzell in Innerrhoden in 1991.
But in general, it happened in Switzerland in about 1972. That's what I remember. So
Okay.
I mean,
Yes, that is.
but that just proves your point that it didn't happen the same way. I guess the Swiss men were a lot gentler with their wives than us
Oh, so
Americans.
it's just American men who are
Yeah,
tyrannical abusers. Oh, okay.
yeah,
Even though us American men are primarily of European extraction, even to this day.
yeah. It's all the bad men who came over here. That's why women
Oh,
are afraid of us now.
so we're not the prison so Australia is not the real prison colony. It's actually us. Okay.
Yeah, well, and women know this. That's why they'd rather be trapped in a forest with a bear rather than a man, because that's how bad us white American men are. We just went through this the Declaration of Independence and all the reasons for feminism and divorce are just outlined right there.
My mind is sorry for moving slow tonight. My mind is spinning because I had not studied the history on this level. 1991 blows my mind. I had never even considered that. Well, but here, okay, let's play this forward a little bit in time. Look at the fractionating of the U.S., not just political system, but the governmental system, the people. Everybody's rebelling against everybody for everything right now.
Yeah. Yeah, they
Because
don't have an understanding.
yeah, They don't know. We clearly don't teach history. I mean, I said at the beginning that I have, that I'm homeschooled and that I chose to study history extensively, and I said things at school. I got a minimum passing grade on a college essay where I was studying it was a college essay on the Second Amendment, and the teacher got just incredibly pissed at me because all the students, you were supposed to write the essay and then give a 15-minute presentation in front of the class about what your essay was on. And so I gave my 15-minute presentation, and the students spent the next half hour peppering me with questions. And I just kept fielding them. And the professor was sitting in back, and I could just see him seething because he could not disagree with a single thing I was saying, and I was right. Like, that's the level. Like, I beat college professors at history. That's the level that I've studied history, and I am now going down this and learning things that I had no idea.
That's because so much of history is given by controlled secondary sources, and they're not experienced with reading primary sources.
Well, and even if you're reading primary sources, you have to go back and you have to look at what those you have to understand the culture of the era. You have to understand, because we were talking about the word abuse last Wednesday. Well, the definition of words changes. So now I have to go, like, part of what I was doing in that essay on the Second Amendment was correcting the definitions of the words for what they meant at the time. It's a lot of fucking work, guys, to understand this stuff. So to some extent, I understand, when people, they just take the soundbite history that they get in public school, which is shit. It is, guys, like on almost
designed to
everything.
make useful idiots.
Yes. Well, and how much history does somebody really need to know when all you need them to do is go in the factory and turn a bolt, the same, install the same bolt 1,000 times a day or whatever, right? How much history do they really need to know?
They need to know a lot because they have the right to vote. And they're gonna vote, but they're really not very well informed on things, which is probably why it's a good idea to not have general suffrage and give everyone the right to vote, because
You sound like
the vast
Dabney.
majority of people do not have the ability to or the insight to govern.
Dabney would agree with you.
There's a lot of people, I think, who would agree who would agree with us now. Okay.
And it's not just women that should.
No, there's a lot of men that should not be voting.
Right. So you said when we started this that this was going to be controversial. How controversial do you think we got tonight? Or did we just expose people to a different way of thinking and hopefully provide a template for understanding some of these things, looking things in a historical context, and maybe one reason why we are where we are? And notice, none of us have come up with a solution how to go back to the way it was. I don't have one.
Well, I was gonna ask that question as a hypothetical, not trying to say that we have one, but, well, for example, on the vote, it used to be that you had to own land to vote, and the reason that works is not because land ownership itself grants you some special status, but because in order to be able to own and manage land successfully, you had to be well-read, you had to understand mathematics, you had to understand, you were probably pretty well educated to be able to do this.
But it's in the game.
Have a certain amount of responsibility. You
exactly
have a certain responsibility, and you'd carry that responsibility in other places.
Right. So clearly the education, we can't use education as a standard anymore because the education system is a giant fucking fail, as we have demonstrated ably tonight, I believe. So what metric do we use? And I'm struggling to think of one. From the aspect of needing to have skin in the game, you could say ownership of property. Well, folks,
Well,
I have bad news. If you have a mortgage, you do not own that piece of property. The bank does. You're renting it from the bank one payment at a
Right.
time. So most people own their houses by mortgage right now. Like it's a lot. It's huge. Okay. So all the people who got mortgages can't vote.
If I own a condominium free and clear, does that count for property?
That's an interesting question because it isn't technically land. It's part of another building.
See, I'm just pointing out this is complicated. It's
Yeah,
difficult to
absolutely.
come up with a solution
Right.
here.
No, the complications are same. This is not like the first time in history there's been complications with voting and stuff like that. Like even the Roman Empire had problems with like them granting whole sections of people just the right to the vote, and all sorts of people gaining the right to vote. And as for actual solutions, look, it's a messed up world. God's providence, God's sovereign over providence, crazy things can happen, and it could not be so crazy. It could be a smooth transition somehow where some problem gets worked out by necessity. Who knows? Or it could all
Well,
come crumbling down,
yeah.
has to be rebuilt. We don't know.
the most transitions are not smooth, but or at least they are not smooth at the time, but they tend to be perceived as smooth afterwards. Because I'm thinking the transition from 1939 and the Great Depression economy to 1946, where the world just looks completely different 7 years later, 6 or 7 years later, right? And a lot of people would tell you not a smooth transition, but when we look back at it, and even the people who lived through it were like, yeah, the war sucked, but it was this focusing moment where everyone came together and they understood the risks, they understood the benefits, and they understood the goals. So in hindsight, that transitional period is going to appear to be less turbulent than it actually was. I guarantee you the people in 1939, you go back and actually read like newspaper stories and all of that, again, reading primary material, they were actually speaking a lot like we were now. The Great Depression would never end. That was a very common theme of 1939, that the Great Depression, this was just the new normal, just accept it. Here's how you can get through it. So yes, the transition will happen. And we have a different prior stream on what that is and what that'll look like. So I won't dive into it here.
So the parallel is everybody right now says feminism will never end.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think
Divorce will never end. And you're saying, yeah, maybe it will. We just don't know how it's going to change.
Well, I did actually even imply that in the prior stream we did. That you can see these monumental changes happen in a relatively short period of time because the necessity is so great that the entire country just kind of looks at it and says, well, this is what we're going to do now, because it's either this or we all die. And we don't all want to die. Yeah. And by the way, since doing that stream where we were talking demographics and all that, new data has come out in the US, and it ain't pretty, folks. The birth rates dropped to 1.6. The total number of people born in the last 5 years is not good. I forget the number is, but
1.7 previously.
Yeah, I think so. But even the nominals, just like the number of people born in the last 5-year cohort was down like 20%. It's a lot.
Yeah.
So there might come a point where and I do not think birth rates will drive it. It's so abstract to most people that they don't connect with it. But here's something that could, instead of let's just say that instead of an invasion of Taiwan, China just collapses and breaks apart. That'll drag down Russia with it, and all of a sudden there's this vacuum of industry where we can no longer produce cars, we can no longer produce ambulances, we can no longer produce medical gear, and there's
just
this
globalized everything.
right. So what if this future collapse is a deglobalization that pushes everyone towards really needing to be able to survive on their own without without the beneficence of the state and these giant state funded things like emergency care, because the products that make it happen simply don't exist. They can be made to exist again, but you have to rebuild the manufacturing somewhere else, and that just takes time. So it's a limited time frame, but you're talking 5 to 10 years depending on the product. So there could be 5 to 10 years where you just don't have stuff, and that's just the way it is. You can't buy it for any amount of money because it doesn't exist anymore. How would feminists react in that world where how do feminists react in a world where not even the richest man can buy what we previously considered a simple, a easily accessible tchotchke? I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? I think we're into the speculative part.
Yes, we are.
This was all about pointing out that, hey, there is a narrative here. That's how this fits in. This narrative of consent of the governed has pervaded our world, been reinterpreted, and used to justify a lot of things. It's a very, very deep narrative that people don't even realize is there.
Yeah.
We don't even know what natural rights are anymore. We don't know what natural law is anymore. And so we have, we think the government needs to grant us rights instead of having rights bestowed upon us by our creator. We can't even have an intelligent conversation about that is today. And then we want to argue what those are all the way to the extreme where you just rebel against anything that imposes on you something that you don't want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Let's end it here.
Yeah, I'm going to spiral into Wikipedia articles and primary source searches from that. Okay, this is going to be a rough evening. All right. Well, any final words, gentlemen?
Nope.
No.
Said it all.
Nick, you got anything?
I'm good, guys.
All right. Well, with that, go ahead, please like, share, and subscribe, folks, particularly on the sharing. We would love it if people saw these conversations and maybe they want to come join the conversation at some point. So we're trying to provoke thought here. So sharing is the most important thing you can do for us. And with that, we will see you all on Wednesday.